The alarms on my ship were screaming before I even reached the bridge. I am Vayana Threll, daughter of the Kirinth Emperor, commander of the scout fleet, and in this moment, the person about to make the biggest mistake of her life without knowing it. Report, I said, gripping the edge of the command console. A single human vessel, Your Highness. Damaged, drifting near the outer marker, said Doran, my first officer, his 4 eyes flicking between screens. No weapons fire detected, no response to hailing. A human ship, alone, this far into Kirinth space. I felt the corner of my mouth curl. Humans were a young species, barely out of their own solar system, still fighting each other over scraps of land on their homeworld when they weren't busy losing skirmishes at the edges of the galaxy. My father called them insects with spaceships. My tutors called them a footnote in the history of civilized life. I called them an opportunity. Bring it in, I said, gently. I want it intact. And the crew, alive, if possible. My father would enjoy a new specimen for the research division. I did not think of it as capturing a person. I thought of it as collecting a curiosity. That is the first thing I need you to understand about who I was before all of this happened. I did not see humans as equals. I saw them as something to observe, something small and breakable, something that could never truly threaten someone like me. I was wrong. I did not know it yet, but I was already wrong. My ship, the Solmara, closed the distance in minutes. The human vessel was small, barely large enough for a crew of a dozen, its hull scarred and blackened along one side, as though it had survived something far worse than an ambush. Tractor beams locked on. There was no resistance, no return fire, no desperate escape attempt. That should have told me something. It didn't. We pulled the wreck into our landing bay, and I walked down myself to see the specimen with my own eyes. My guards went in first, weapons raised, expecting panic or aggression from whoever was left alive inside. What they found instead was one man, sitting calmly on the floor of the wreckage, hands raised, not in fear, but as if he were simply choosing to make things easy. His name, we would later learn, was Marcus Doyle. He was tall for a human, with short dark hair and quiet gray eyes that moved slowly across every face and every weapon in the room, cataloging, not cowering. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, a line of dried blood along his jaw, but his breathing was steady, too steady. Most captives, human or otherwise, breathe fast when chains are being placed on their wrists. His breathing barely changed at all. Bind him, I ordered. Full restraints, level 3 containment. Level 3 is for creatures 3 times his size, Doran said quietly. I am aware, I said. Do it anyway. I don't know why I gave that order. Call it instinct, though I would not have admitted it then. Something about the way he looked at me, not with fear, not with hatred, but with a kind of patient calm, as if he already knew how this story would end, and was simply waiting for the rest of us to catch up. The guards moved in. He did not fight them. He let them place heavy binders on his wrists, let them march him through the corridor toward the containment block, past dozens of my crew who stopped to stare at the strange, quiet creature from a species they had always been taught to underestimate. I walked beside him for a moment, close enough to study his face. You're not afraid, I said, more to myself than to him. He turned his head, gray eyes meeting mine, and said, in careful, accented Kirinth, would it help if I were? I did not answer. I did not know how. The containment cell was a circular room with reinforced walls, a single bench, and a transparent barrier through which my science officers could observe him at all times. I stood on the other side of that barrier for a long moment after they sealed him inside, watching him settle onto the bench as calmly as if he were waiting for a transport, not sitting inside an alien prison cell light years from his home. Your Highness, said Ithra, my chief science officer, stepping up beside me with a datapad in her hand. Should we begin standard evaluation protocols? Yes, I said. I want full readings. Biology, cognition, behavior, everything. Understood, She hesitated. May I ask why you intervened personally? This capture could have been handled entirely by security. I thought about the question longer than I should have. Because my father has never seen a human up close, I said, and because I want to be the one who proves they are exactly what we've always said they are. Small, simple, no real threat. Ithra nodded and moved off to begin her instructions to the science team. I stayed at the barrier a moment longer, watching Marcus Doyle sit quietly in his cell, his hands folded, his eyes closed, as though he were meditating rather than trapped. I told myself I was simply doing my duty. I told myself this was nothing more than another successful mission, another trophy for the Dominion, another line in my record that would please my father and secure my place as heir to the throne. I did not know that within a matter of days, everything I believed about strength, about weakness, about my own species and his, would be tested and broken apart. I did not know that the calm man in that cell was not calm because he had given up. He was calm because he already understood something about himself that none of us did yet. That night, alone in my quarters, I reviewed the initial scans Ithra had sent me. Human anatomy was nothing new to our researchers. We had studied captured soldiers before, though rarely alive, and never for very long. Marcus Doyle's readings looked ordinary at first glance. 2 arms, 2 legs, a single heart, lungs built for a thinner atmosphere than most of my crew preferred. Unremarkable, by every measure we understood. But there was one line in the report that caught my attention. A small notation from one of the junior technicians, easy to overlook. Subject's cellular activity shows minor irregular spikes under observation. Possible sensor malfunction. Recommend recalibration. I almost dismissed it. Sensor errors were common with new equipment, and our scanning arrays had not been designed with human biology in mind. I marked the note for follow-up and moved on to the next file, thinking nothing more of it. It would be the first of many warnings I chose to ignore. The following morning, I returned to the containment block earlier than my schedule required. I told myself it was for the research. I told myself the Emperor would want a full report on the specimen's behavior, not just his biology. I told myself many things that morning, and only one of them was true. I was curious about him. Marcus was awake when I arrived, sitting cross-legged on the bench, watching the corridor beyond his cell with the same quiet attention he had shown since the moment we brought him aboard. When he saw me approach, he did not stand, did not bow, did not offer any of the small gestures of respect my own people would have given a member of the royal family. He simply looked at me, and after a moment, spoke. "Princess," he said. It was not a question. Somehow, he already knew who I was. "You may call me Vayana," I said, surprising myself. Royal protocol did not allow prisoners to address me by name. I broke that rule without thinking, and I would break several more before this was over. "Vayana," he repeated, testing the shape of it. "Marcus." "I know your name," I said. "I have read your file. Rank and file Marine, 26 years old by your calendar, serving aboard a supply vessel when it was damaged and separated from its convoy." "That's the official story," he said. Something in the way he said it made me pause. "Is there an unofficial one?" He tilted his head slightly, studying me the way I had been studying him. "Would you believe me if I told you? Try me." He was quiet for a moment, and I found myself leaning slightly closer to the barrier, waiting. "My ship wasn't damaged by an accident," he said finally. "We were testing something, out past the marker, further than we're supposed to go. Something happened during the test. I don't remember all of it. I woke up adrift, alone, and your fleet found me before I could repair the engines." "Testing what?" He looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time I saw something behind his calm expression. Not fear, something closer to caution. "Something my people have been keeping quiet for a long time," he said. "Something we hoped we'd never have to use." I laughed, though I am not proud of it now. It was the easy, dismissive laugh of someone who has never had her assumptions truly challenged. "Humans have a habit of exaggerating your own importance," I said. "My tutors always said your species talks bigger than it fights." He smiled at that, a small, patient smile that did not reach his eyes. "There's a saying where I'm from," he said, "don't wake a sleeping giant." "Is that supposed to frighten me?" "No," he said, "it's supposed to be a warning. Whether you listen to it is up to you." I left the containment block that day, telling myself his words meant nothing, that he was simply trying to make himself seem more interesting than he was, a common trick among prisoners hoping to delay their fate or earn better treatment. I had heard similar bluffs from 100 captives across a dozen species, threats without substance, stories without proof. But that night, I found myself thinking about the sensor readings Ithra had flagged as a possible malfunction. I found myself wondering, just for a moment, what would happen if they were not errors at all. I did not act on that thought, not yet. Instead, I returned to my duties, filed my reports, and prepared for my father's arrival in 3 days' time, when he would see the specimen for himself and decide what use the Dominion would make of him. I did not know that before my father ever set foot on my ship, everything about Marcus Doyle would already have changed. I did not know that the calm, patient man behind that barrier was not simply waiting to be studied. He was waiting to see what kind of person I truly was, and whether I deserved to understand what he really was before it was too late for both of us. Looking back now, I think he already knew, even then, that someone aboard my ship would not be able to resist testing him the way I refused to. I think he knew that patience like his does not last forever in a place built on threats and suspicion. I simply did not want to believe that the giant in the old saying he mentioned to me was already awake, quietly waiting inside the calmest man I had ever met. My father's ship had not yet arrived, but rumors about the human prisoner had already spread through the Solmara like smoke through vents. I heard them in the mess hall, in the training rooms, even in the maintenance corridors where the lower ranks gathered between shifts. Some said the human had tried to escape and been subdued in seconds. Others said he had sat motionless for 2 full days without eating, without speaking, without so much as blinking. Neither story was true, but I understood why they spread so quickly. A quiet prisoner is a strange thing to a crew raised on stories of screaming, clawing captives from dozens of conquered worlds. I visited him again the next morning, telling myself it was for research, though by now I no longer fully believed that excuse myself. "You're becoming a regular guest," Marcus said as I approached the barrier. He was seated on the bench again, elbows on his knees, watching me, the way he always did, with quiet, careful attention. "I have questions," I said. "You always do." I ignored the small note of amusement in his voice and activated the datapad in my hand. "Tell me about your homeworld." He studied me for a moment before answering. "Why do you want to know?" "Because my people have fought yours in small skirmishes for years, and yet we know almost nothing about you. Every report calls humans primitive, weak, disorganized, and yet here you are, calm in a cell built for something 3 times your size, speaking my language, asking me questions instead of begging for your life. Would begging change anything?" "No," I admitted. "Then there's my answer," he said. "We adapt to what's in front of us. It's the one thing my people have always been good at." I sat down on the small chair the guards had placed near the barrier for these sessions, setting the datapad on my lap. "Adapt how?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes distant, as though he were deciding how much of the truth I deserved to hear. "Earth wasn't kind to us," he said finally. "Not in the early years, after we started reaching for the stars. We ran into problems out here that we weren't ready for. Radiation, gravity wells, hostile environments on worlds we tried to settle. People died. A lot of people died before we understood what we were dealing with. And my people don't like losing," he said simply. "So we changed." "Changed how?" He looked at me directly then, and something in his expression made the hair along my arms rise, though I could not have said why. "There are things about my body that your scanners haven't fully understood yet. Things that only show themselves under the right conditions." I thought immediately of Ithra's report, the irregular spikes, the note about sensor malfunction. "What conditions?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "The kind you don't want to create," he said. I wanted to press him further, but at that moment, Doran's voice came through my earpiece, informing me that Commander Cale Dorn had requested an urgent meeting regarding fleet security. I rose from my chair, tucking the datapad under my arm. "We'll continue this later," I said. "I'll be here," Marcus said, and there was something almost sad in the way he said it, as though he already knew our conversations were numbered. Commander Cale Dorn was not a man I trusted, though I had never been able to prove any wrongdoing on his part. He had served under my father for over a decade, risen through the ranks through a combination of genuine skill and quiet, careful ambition, and he had never fully hidden his belief that I, as a young princess still building her reputation, was not fit to command a fleet this size. He met me in the strategy room, standing at attention with the kind of exaggerated respect that always felt more like mockery than sincerity. "Your Highness," he said, "I wanted to discuss the security protocols surrounding our new prisoner." "What about them?" "I believe they are insufficient." I raised an eyebrow. "He is contained in a level 3 cell, under constant observation, restrained whenever he leaves that cell for evaluation." "What more do you propose?" "I propose we stop treating him like a guest and start treating him like the threat our sensors suggest he might be." That caught my attention immediately. "What sensors?" Dorn tapped a command into the terminal beside him, pulling up a series of readings I had not yet seen. Ithra's team, it seemed, had continued monitoring Marcus far more closely than I had realized, and the irregular spikes noted in the early reports had not gone away. If anything, they had grown more frequent, more pronounced, particularly during our conversations. "Every time you speak with him," Dorn said, "his biological readings shift. Elevated heart rate, increased cellular activity in patterns our science team cannot fully explain. He is calm on the surface, Your Highness, but something underneath that calm is very much awake." I felt a small chill at hearing my own private thoughts confirmed by cold data. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we test him," Dorn said. "Under controlled conditions, before your father arrives. If there is something dangerous inside that creature, I would rather discover it now, in a contained environment, than have it revealed in front of the Emperor himself." "Absolutely not," I said, more sharply than I intended. "He is a research subject, not a combat exercise. Any testing will be done through proper science protocols, not through provocation." Dorn's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes told me he had expected this answer and had already planned around it. "Of course, Your Highness. I only wished to raise my concerns formally. I should have paid closer attention to that moment. I should have recognized the particular stillness in his posture, the careful neutrality in his voice, as the sign of a man who had already decided to act, regardless of what I said. But I was young, confident in my own authority, and eager to return to my conversations with Marcus rather than dwell on Dorn's paranoia. I dismissed the meeting and returned to my quarters, where I spent the evening reviewing the readings Dorn had shown me alongside Ithra's original notes. The pattern was undeniable now. Every time Marcus felt something, curiosity, humor, even the quiet sadness I had noticed in his voice, his body responded in ways no human biology I had studied should allow. Cellular activity that should have taken hours to register was happening in seconds. Micro-tears in his tissue, likely from the rough handling during his capture, were closing faster than our medical scanners could properly track. I found myself staring at those readings long after I should have gone to sleep, turning over his words in my mind. "There are things about my body that your scanners haven't fully understood yet, the kind you don't want to create." I told myself I would raise these findings with Ithra in the morning, request a full evaluation, proceed carefully and scientifically as I had always intended. I told myself there was no urgency, that whatever Marcus was hiding could wait until we understood it properly, under safe and controlled conditions. I did not know that Commander Dorn had no intention of waiting for my permission. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my door chime far earlier than expected. Dorn stood outside, his 4 eyes wide, with something I rarely saw in him: alarm. "Your Highness," he said, "you need to come to the lower arena immediately." "What's happened?" "Commander Dorn has moved the prisoner," Dorn said. "He's arranged a combat trial. It's already begun." My blood ran cold. On whose authority? "He's citing fleet security regulations. Testing potential threats before the Emperor's arrival falls under his jurisdiction as head of security. Technically." "Technically," I repeated, already moving past him toward the corridor, pulling on my outer robe as I went. "Get me eyes on that arena, now." We reached the security deck in minutes, and the moment the arena feed appeared on the main screen, I understood exactly how badly I had underestimated both Dorn's ambition and the danger of what he was about to unleash. The arena was a wide circular chamber, typically used for training exercises among my own soldiers. Its floor reinforced with impact-resistant plating, its walls lined with observation windows where a small crowd of officers had already gathered to watch. In the center of that arena stood Marcus, stripped of his restraints, wearing simple training clothes instead of his torn uniform, his expression calm, even as 3 of Dorn's largest soldiers entered from the opposite side, armed with stun batons. "Commander," I said into the comm, my voice sharp enough to cut through the chatter on the deck, "explain yourself immediately." Dorn's voice came back through the speakers, calm and unbothered. "A simple evaluation, Your Highness. We are testing the prisoner's physical capabilities under mild stress conditions. Nothing lethal, nothing that violates protocol. You had no authority to remove him from containment without my direct approval. With respect, Your Highness, security matters fall under my jurisdiction when a potential threat to this vessel is involved. I believe recent readings justify caution." I wanted to argue further, but the feed showed the first soldier already moving, closing the distance toward Marcus with the casual confidence of someone who has never once doubted his own strength against a smaller opponent. "Stop this," I said. "Stop it now." "It's already begun, Your Highness," Dorn said. "Would you rather I halt mid-exercise and risk destabilizing the situation further?" I did not answer. I could not look away from the screen. The first soldier swung his baton in a wide arc toward Marcus's shoulder, a strike meant to subdue rather than seriously harm, the kind of blow that would have dropped almost any creature of his size instantly. Marcus moved. It happened faster than my eyes could properly track, faster than the recording equipment seemed prepared for. One moment he stood still, the next he had simply stepped aside, the baton passing through empty air where his shoulder had been a heartbeat earlier. The soldier stumbled, off balance from the missed strike, and Marcus caught his wrist, redirecting the momentum with a small, almost gentle motion that sent the much larger man tumbling to the floor. The crowd in the observation windows went silent. "Again," Dorn's voice said calmly, though I could hear the faint edge of surprise beneath his composure. "Continue the evaluation." The 2 remaining soldiers exchanged a brief, uncertain glance before advancing together, batons raised, moving with far more caution than their fallen companion had shown. I watched Marcus's expression shift, just slightly, the calm patience I had grown used to hardening into something colder, something more focused. "This needs to stop," I said again, turning to Dorn. "Get down there, now." "Your Highness, if I intervene without proper authorization, Dorn will use it against you politically." "I don't care about politics," I snapped. "I care about what's about to happen in that arena." But even as I said it, I understood, with a growing, sinking certainty, that whatever was about to happen had already been set into motion the moment Dorn ordered that first strike. On the screen, Marcus rolled his shoulders, exhaled slowly, and closed his eyes for just a moment, as though steadying himself before the tide. Then he opened them again, and even through the grainy feed, I could see something had changed. The calm was gone. In its place was something quieter and far more dangerous. The giant, it seemed, had finally decided to wake up. I have replayed what happened next in my mind more times than I can count, and even now, I struggle to describe it in a way that does it justice. The two remaining soldiers moved in together, one from the left, one from the right, batons raised, moving with the practiced coordination of fighters who had trained together for years. Under normal circumstances, against almost any opponent of Marcus's size, that coordination would have ended the exercise within seconds. Marcus did not wait for them to close the distance. He moved first, a single step that closed the gap faster than my mind wanted to accept, faster than the recording drones seemed able to properly capture. The soldier on the left barely had time to widen his eyes before Marcus caught the baton mid-swing, twisted it from his grip with a small, controlled motion, and used the man's own momentum to send him crashing into his approaching companion. Both soldiers went down in a tangle of limbs and armor. The observation deck erupted into stunned murmurs. "Commander," I said sharply into the comm, "end this exercise immediately." "Your Highness, the specimen has not yet reached his limit," Dorn replied, and something in his voice had changed. The calm authority was still there, but underneath it I could hear the sharp edge of genuine fascination, the kind of fascination that made men do foolish, dangerous things in pursuit of an answer. "I am ordering you to end this. With respect, Your Highness, I believe we are close to understanding exactly what kind of threat we brought aboard this ship. I would prefer to finish gathering that information now, in a controlled arena, rather than later, in an uncontrolled situation." I turned to Doran. "Get down there yourself if you have to. I want that arena sealed, and everyone inside evacuated immediately." Doran hesitated only a moment, before nodding and moving quickly toward the exit, several security officers falling in behind him. But even as they left the deck, I understood, with a sinking certainty, that we would not reach the arena in time to stop whatever was already unfolding. On the screen, Dorn's remaining soldiers, 6 of them now, moved into the arena from a side entrance, clearly having been held in reserve for exactly this contingency. They fanned out around Marcus in a wide circle, weapons no longer limited to simple stun batons. Several carried short-range restraint nets, designed for capturing creatures that had proven too strong for standard containment. I watched Marcus's gaze move slowly across the circle of soldiers surrounding him, and for the first time since his capture, I saw something in his expression that was not calm at all. It was resignation, as though some part of him had known, from the very beginning, that this moment was inevitable, and had simply been waiting to see how long the rest of us would take to force it into existence. "Please," he said quietly, and though the arena's microphones were not designed to pick up soft speech, the sudden silence in the chamber let his words carry clearly to the observation deck. "Stop this now. You do not want to see what happens if you don't." "Continue," Dorn ordered. The soldiers closed in. What happened over the next several minutes has become something of a legend among those who witnessed it, though no 2 accounts I have heard since describe it in quite the same way. I can only tell you what I saw, and what I felt, watching from that observation deck with my heart pounding against my ribs. Marcus did not simply defend himself, he became something else entirely. The first net thrown toward him tore apart in his hands, as though it were made of paper rather than reinforced fiber. The first soldier who reached him found himself lifted and set gently, almost carefully, outside the immediate combat area, as though Marcus were still trying, even now, to avoid causing real harm. But as more soldiers pressed in, as the restraint devices grew more aggressive, as someone finally made the decision to switch their batons from stun settings to something with real force behind it, I watched the careful restraint in Marcus's movements begin to fall away. His muscles seemed to shift beneath his skin, not grotesquely, not monstrously, but with a kind of terrible efficiency, as though his entire body were rewriting itself in real time to meet the threat in front of him. His movements grew faster, sharper, until my eyes could barely track him from one position to the next. Where a strike landed against him, I saw the skin redden and then, within seconds, return to normal, the damage healing faster than it should have been possible to inflict it. He did not kill anyone. I want to be clear about that, because in the chaos that followed, rumors would spread through the fleet claiming otherwise, each version more exaggerated than the last. What Marcus did that day was disable, one by one, every soldier sent against him, moving them out of the fight with a precision that spoke less of rage and more of terrible, practiced control. By the time the last soldier fell back, clutching an arm that would heal within days rather than the alternative I had feared, the arena floor was littered with groaning, defeated men, and Marcus stood alone in the center of it, breathing hard, his eyes scanning the observation windows above him. He found me immediately, as though he had known exactly where I would be standing the entire time. "I warned you," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "I warned all of you." Dorn's voice broke through the calm, no longer calm, no longer composed. "Seal the arena. Full lockdown. I want every available unit responding immediately." "Belay that order," I said, stepping forward, my hands gripping the edge of the console. "Belay it now." "Your Highness, with respect, this creature has just disabled 6 trained soldiers in under 3 minutes. This is precisely the threat I warned you about." "And you created this threat," I snapped, "by attacking a man who never once tried to harm anyone until you gave him no other choice." I did not wait for his response. I moved toward the exit myself, ignoring Doran's protests through the calm, ignoring the frightened faces of the officers around me, who clearly believed I was about to walk into my own destruction. Perhaps I was. I did not know, in that moment, whether Marcus's restraint would extend to me, whether the calm, careful man I had spoken with over the past several days still existed somewhere beneath whatever had just been unleashed in that arena. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that if anyone was going to end this before it spiraled into a full crisis, it needed to be me, not Dorn, not more soldiers, not another wave of violence that would only confirm every fear my crew now carried about the creature we had brought aboard. By the time I reached the arena's main entrance, Doran and a small group of officers had already gathered there, weapons raised, uncertain whether to advance or hold position. Beyond the reinforced doorway, I could see Marcus still standing in the center of the arena floor, his chest rising and falling with each breath, watching the entrance with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and something that looked almost like sorrow. "Your Highness," Doran said quietly as I approached, "I cannot recommend this." "Noted," I said, and stepped past him. The doorway sealed shut behind me, and I found myself alone, in that vast, damaged arena, with a man who had just, single-handedly, dismantled everything my people believed about his species' capabilities. He watched me approach without moving, his gray eyes tracking my every step, and when I finally stopped several paces away, close enough to speak without raising my voice, close enough that I could see the faint, rapid healing still working its way across a scrape along his forearm, he spoke first. "You shouldn't be in here," he said quietly. "Neither should you," I replied, "not like this, not because of what my commander decided to do without my permission." Something in his expression softened, just slightly. "You didn't order this." "No. I believe you." We stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between us, broken only by the distant murmur of voices from the observation deck above and the soft hum of the arena's damaged systems. "What are you?" I asked finally, the question I had been avoiding since the moment Ithra's first reports crossed my desk. Marcus exhaled slowly, some of the tension in his shoulders easing, though the strange, heightened readiness in his posture did not entirely disappear. "I told you," he said. "My people adapt. A long time ago, faced with worlds that tried to kill us in 100 different ways, we found a path forward that most of the galaxy never had to consider. We changed what we were, at the deepest level, so that we could survive things that should have ended us. Into what? Into something that only shows itself when it has to, he said. Most of the time, I am exactly what your report said, an ordinary soldier, unremarkable, by every measure you understand. It's only under real threat, real danger, that the rest of what I am comes forward. And the rest of what you are, I said slowly, is this. He nodded once. This. I looked around the ruined arena, at the soldiers being carried out by medical teams through a side entrance, at the deep marks left in reinforced plating by strikes that should never have been possible from a creature his size. I thought of my father's arrival, still 2 days away, and the report I would now have to give him, a report that would reshape everything the Dominion believed about the species we had always dismissed as small and simple. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" I asked. "Before any of this happened?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching my face, as though weighing exactly how much honesty I could handle. "Would you have believed me?" he asked. "Before you saw it for yourself?" I thought about our earlier conversations, about the easy, dismissive way I had laughed off his warning about sleeping giants, about my own certainty, so carefully built over a lifetime of lessons about human weakness, that nothing this calm, quiet man could say would ever truly threaten my worldview. "No," I admitted. "I don't think I would have." "Then you have your answer," he said. "Some things can only be understood once they've already happened." Above us, I heard Doran's voice crackle through a nearby speaker, informing me that additional security units were requesting permission to enter the arena. I raised a hand toward the nearest camera, a clear signal to hold position, and turned my attention back to Marcus. "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on you," he said, "and on how many more mistakes your people are willing to make before they decide to actually listen." I did not have an answer for him in that moment. I only knew, standing there in the wreckage of an arena built to test a creature we had never truly understood, that whatever careful, arrogant certainty I had carried onto this ship days earlier was gone now, replaced by something far more uncertain and far more urgent. We were no longer dealing with a simple prisoner. We were dealing with the awakened proof of everything humanity had chosen never to reveal to the wider galaxy, and I was the one who would have to decide, in the days ahead, whether that proof would end in disaster or in something the history of both our species had never seen before. News of what happened in the arena spread through the Solmara faster than any official report could contain it. By the time I left the arena myself, escorted by a visibly shaken Doran and a security team that no longer looked at Marcus with simple curiosity, but with something closer to genuine fear, I could already feel the shift in the ship around me. Officers who had once walked past the containment block without a second glance now gathered in small, nervous clusters, whispering about what they had seen on the security feeds. Even the lower ranks, who rarely concerned themselves with matters above their own duties, seemed to sense that something fundamental had changed aboard our vessel. I called Ithra to my quarters within the hour, along with the full science team responsible for monitoring Marcus since his capture. "I want every piece of data you have," I said, standing at the head of the small conference table, "and I want it now, not filtered through reports designed to make anyone look competent." Ithra exchanged a brief glance with her colleagues before stepping forward. "Your Highness, we believe what we witnessed today confirms a theory some of us suspected but could not fully prove given the limitations of our equipment." "Go on." "The irregular cellular activity we first noted shortly after his capture was not a malfunction," she said. "It was a low-level version of what we saw in the arena, a kind of standby state, if you will, always present beneath the surface, ready to activate under sufficient stress or threat." "And once activated? Enhanced strength, enhanced speed, accelerated healing at a rate our medical scanners struggle to properly measure, heightened reflexes and perception. Based on what limited data we captured today, the transformation appears to draw on reserves of energy his body stores specifically for this purpose, which explains why it cannot be maintained indefinitely. How long can it be maintained? We don't know, Ithra admitted. Today's exercise did not last long enough for us to observe any decline in his capabilities. I absorbed that information slowly, turning it over in my mind alongside everything Marcus himself had told me in the arena. Is this common among his species? Ithra hesitated. Based on the fact that our previous encounters with human forces gave no indication of this capability, I believe it is either extremely rare or deliberately hidden. Deliberately, I said quietly, remembering the careful, measured way Marcus had spoken about his people's history, about the choice they had made never to reveal this side of themselves to the wider galaxy. The meeting continued for another hour, covering every angle of data the science team had gathered, but none of it changed the central truth I had already understood standing in that ruined arena. We had captured something far more significant than a simple soldier, and the way we handled the next several hours would determine whether this situation resolved peacefully or became the spark for a conflict none of us were prepared to fight. I found Commander Dorn waiting outside my quarters once the science team had gone, his expression carefully neutral, though I could see the tension in the way he held himself. "Your Highness," he said, "I believe we need to discuss containment options moving forward. We need to discuss why you ignored a direct order and endangered this entire vessel," I replied. "With respect, Your Highness, I made a judgment call based on legitimate security concerns. The readings we had gathered suggested a potential threat that needed to be understood before your father's arrival, not after. Your judgment call resulted in 6 injured soldiers and a prisoner who has now demonstrated capabilities that could, under different circumstances, have ended far worse for everyone aboard this ship." Dorn's jaw tightened, but he did not back down. "And if I had waited, Your Highness, and the Emperor arrived to find a threat none of us had properly assessed, what then? I acted to protect this fleet." I studied him for a long moment, weighing the very real possibility that some part of what he said held truth, against the certainty that his methods had made an already delicate situation infinitely more dangerous. "We will discuss your judgment further once this crisis is resolved," I said finally. "For now, I want every soldier stood down from active threat posture around the containment block. No further provocations. No further tests without my direct authorization. And if he decides to act on his own, then we will address that when it happens," I said. "Right now, the greatest danger to this ship is not the prisoner. It is the fear your actions have created among a crew who now believe we are harboring something we cannot control." Dorn did not look convinced, but he nodded stiffly and departed, leaving me alone in the corridor with the weight of a decision I knew I could not delay much longer. I returned to the containment block that evening, this time accompanied by only a small security detail, all of them ordered explicitly to stand down unless directly threatened. Marcus had been returned to his cell following the arena incident, though the barrier separating us now hummed with a visibly reinforced energy signature, a clear sign that my engineers had scrambled to increase containment measures the moment the crisis ended. He was seated on the bench again when I arrived, his posture calm, though I noticed the faint remnants of exhaustion in the way he held himself, evidence that whatever transformation he had undergone that day had cost him something significant. "You came back," he said as I approached. "Did you expect me not to? After what happened today, I wasn't sure what to expect from anyone on this ship." I sat down in the chair, positioned near the barrier, studying his face carefully. "I need to understand what happens next, not just for my own curiosity, but for the safety of everyone aboard this vessel, including you." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's fair. Will you do that again, if provoked?" "I don't want to," he said. "What you saw today isn't something I enjoy using. Every time it happens, it costs me, physically, and in other ways I don't think your scanners can measure. But you will, if you have to." He met my eyes directly. Yes. If my life is truly threatened, or if there's no other way to protect myself, yes, I will. I appreciated his honesty, even as it complicated everything I had hoped to resolve simply and quietly before my father's arrival. My father lands in 2 days, I said. He will want to see you personally. He will likely want to understand exactly what we witnessed today, and depending on how that conversation unfolds, he may order further testing, further containment measures, or worse. And what do you want? Marcus asked quietly. The question caught me off guard, though perhaps it should not have. I had been so focused on managing the crisis, on protecting my crew, on preparing for my father's judgment, that I had not fully allowed myself to consider what I personally believed should happen next. I want to understand you, I said slowly, the words feeling strange and honest in a way few things I said aboard this ship ever did. Not as a specimen, not as a threat to be contained or a trophy to present to my father, as whatever it is you actually are. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a softness I had not seen since before the arena, since before Dorn's ambition had forced this crisis into existence. That's more than most of your people have offered me since I woke up on this ship, he said quietly. Most of my people have never had reason to question everything they were taught about your species until today, I said. We sat in silence for a while after that, neither of us speaking, though the quiet between us felt different than the tense silences that had followed the arena. It felt, strangely, like the beginning of something neither of us had words for yet, a fragile understanding built not on the calm, careful conversations we had shared before, but on the raw truth that had been forced into the open by violence neither of us had wanted. There's something you should know, Marcus said finally, breaking the silence, about why my ship was really out here, past the marker, doing the kind of testing that led to my capture. I straightened slightly. You mentioned that before. You said it was something your people hoped never to use. It was, he said, a contingency, a response to exactly this kind of situation, if humanity's true capabilities were ever discovered by another species before we were ready to reveal them ourselves. What kind of response? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, as though weighing exactly how much to tell me. If word of what happened today reaches command before I can explain the full context myself, there's a very real chance my people will assume the worst. That I was captured, tortured, or worse, by a hostile force testing weapons against a live subject. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. And what would they do, in that case? Nothing good, he said simply. For your dominion, or for this ship. I sat with that information for a long moment, understanding, with growing clarity, that the crisis Dorn's arrogance had created was no longer simply a matter of one soldier and one ship. If Marcus's people believed he had been harmed or threatened by our forces, the consequences could extend far beyond anything my father's fleet was prepared to handle. Then we need to make sure that message never reaches them, I said. Or better yet, we need to make sure the message they receive is the truth, not the worst version of it. How do you propose we do that? Marcus asked. I thought about my father's imminent arrival, about Dorn's continued belief that Marcus represented nothing more than a threat to be contained, about the fragile, uncertain trust that had begun to form between the two of us over these past several days. I don't know yet, I admitted, but I know that whatever happens next has to start with honesty, from both sides. My father needs to understand exactly what we're dealing with before he makes any decisions. And your people need to understand that what happened here was a mistake made by one overzealous commander, not the policy of an entire dominion. Marcus studied me for a long moment, something like cautious hope flickering behind his tired eyes. That's a dangerous kind of honesty, to offer a room full of people who've spent their entire lives believing my species is beneath them. Maybe, I said, but it's the only path I can see that doesn't end in something far worse than what already happened today. Neither of us knew, in that moment, whether my father would listen, whether Dorn's ambition had already set something in motion that could not be stopped, or whether the fragile trust building between us would be enough to prevent the disaster Marcus feared might already be unfolding somewhere beyond the edges of our small, isolated crisis. But for the first time since his capture, I found myself hoping, quietly and fiercely, that it would be enough. My father's ship arrived exactly on schedule. 2 days later, a vast shadow sliding into formation alongside the Solmara with the quiet, effortless authority of a fleet that had never once doubted its own dominance over the galaxy. I met him in the main docking bay, standing at attention with Doran and my senior officers arranged behind me, all of us dressed in formal uniform despite the exhaustion that had settled over the ship since the arena incident. Emperor Threll von Kirinth walked down the boarding ramp with the same measured confidence he carried into every room, his dark eyes sweeping across the assembled officers before settling on me. "Daughter," he said, "I hear you've had an eventful week." "Father," I said, bowing my head slightly, "there is much to discuss." "So I've been told." His gaze flicked briefly toward Commander Dorn, standing rigid among the other officers. Commander Dorn's reports painted quite the alarming picture. A dangerous creature, an uncontrolled outburst, significant risk to this vessel and its crew. "Commander Dorn's reports do not tell the full story," I said carefully. My father studied me for a long moment, the kind of measuring look he had given me since childhood, weighing whether my judgment could be trusted or whether I was simply too inexperienced to see the situation clearly. "Then tell me the full story yourself," he said. "Walk with me." We proceeded through the ship together, my father listening in silence as I explained everything, from the initial capture, to the strange readings Ithra's team had first dismissed as sensor error, to Dorn's unauthorized decision to test Marcus in the arena without my approval, to the transformation that followed, and finally, to the private conversations Marcus and I had shared since, including his warning about how his people might respond if they believed he had been harmed. By the time we reached the containment block, my father's expression had shifted from measured skepticism to something far more serious. "You believe this creature's people would retaliate," he said, "if they learned of what Commander Dorn attempted." "I believe it is a very real possibility," I said, "and I believe the only way to prevent that outcome is to ensure the truth reaches them before any distorted version of events does." My father stopped outside the containment block, turning to face me fully. "And what do you propose exactly? That we simply release him, send him home with an apology, and hope his people forgive the actions of one overzealous commander?" "I propose we treat him the way we should have from the beginning," I said. "Not as a trophy, and not as a threat to be contained, but as a representative of a species we have clearly and dangerously underestimated." "You're suggesting diplomacy," my father said, something unreadable in his voice. "I'm suggesting survival," I replied. "Father, what we saw in that arena was not the full extent of what this species is capable of. It was a single soldier, alone, unarmed, restrained by circumstances that gave him no real advantage, and he still disabled 6 of our trained soldiers without seriously harming any of them, even when he had every reason to. Imagine what an entire military force with these capabilities, properly prepared and equipped, could accomplish if we forced them into open conflict." My father was quiet for a long moment, his eyes drifting toward the containment block's entrance. "You've spent considerable time with this creature these past several days." "I have. And you trust him?" I thought carefully before answering, aware that whatever I said next would shape everything that followed. "I trust that he has been honest with me, even when honesty put him at a disadvantage. I trust that he restrained himself far more than he needed to during the arena incident, even while defending himself against 6 armed soldiers, and I trust that a species capable of that kind of discipline, even in the middle of what should have been a desperate, chaotic fight for survival, deserves more consideration than we have given them so far." My father studied me for a long time after that, and I could see him weighing not just my words, but the changes in me that this entire situation had clearly brought about, changes I had not fully recognized in myself until I heard them reflected back in the certainty of my own voice. "Bring me to him," he said finally. "I want to see this for myself." The containment block had been quietly reinforced since the arena incident, though my father barely glanced at the additional security measures as we approached. Marcus was seated on the bench when we arrived, and he rose slowly to his feet as the Emperor of the Kirinth Dominion stepped into view, though he offered no formal bow, no gesture of submission. "Emperor," Marcus said simply. "So you are the creature who has caused my daughter so much concern," my father said, studying him with the same measuring gaze he had given me minutes earlier. "I didn't set out to cause anyone concern," Marcus replied. "I only defended myself when your commander decided testing me with armed soldiers was an acceptable use of his authority." My father's expression did not change, though I saw something flicker briefly behind his eyes, perhaps surprise at the calm, direct way Marcus addressed him, without the fear or deference he likely expected from a captive standing before the ruler of an entire star empire. "My daughter believes your people would consider what happened here an act of aggression," my father said. "Is that true?" "If the wrong version of events reaches my people," Marcus said, "yes, they would assume the worst, and they would prepare accordingly." "And what would that preparation look like?" Marcus was quiet for a moment before answering. "I would rather you never find out." My father studied him a moment longer, then turned to me. "You believe releasing him, and allowing him to deliver an accurate account of events, is the safest path forward?" "I do," I said. "Continued containment, or worse, further testing, only increases the risk of exactly the outcome we're trying to avoid. And if he simply tells his people we are weak, easily defeated, an empire ripe for conquest, he's had every opportunity to demonstrate exactly how dangerous his people can be," I said, and instead of escalating this situation, he chose restraint, even while defending himself against overwhelming odds. "I don't believe that's a species looking for an excuse to attack us. I believe it's a species that understands the cost of conflict far better than we ever gave them credit for." My father was silent for a long time, his gaze moving between Marcus and me, weighing decades of assumptions about human weakness against the quiet, undeniable evidence standing before him. "Commander Dorn will face disciplinary review for his unauthorized actions," he said finally. "His judgment in this matter was reckless, and it very nearly created a crisis this Dominion was entirely unprepared to face." Relief washed through me, though I kept my expression carefully neutral, aware that the conversation was far from finished. "As for you," my father continued, turning his attention back to Marcus, "I am prepared to authorize your release, on one condition." "What condition?" Marcus asked. "That you carry an accurate account of events back to your people yourself, along with an official message from this Dominion acknowledging the mistake made by our commander, and expressing our desire to avoid further conflict between our species." Marcus considered this for a long moment, before nodding slowly. "I can do that. And," my father added, his gaze shifting briefly toward me, "I believe it would serve both our peoples well if my daughter accompanied any formal delegation established to discuss further relations between our two species, given her direct experience with this situation." I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in my father's tone, though I recognized, beneath his carefully measured words, both a genuine acknowledgement of what I had learned these past several days, and a political opportunity he had already begun calculating. "I would be honored," I said, and found, to my own surprise, that I meant it completely. The formal release took place 2 days later, in a small ceremony attended only by essential personnel, far removed from the fanfare that had accompanied Marcus's initial capture. My father delivered a carefully worded statement, acknowledging the unauthorized actions taken against a captured soldier and expressing the Dominion's willingness to establish proper diplomatic channels with humanity moving forward, rather than continuing the small, scattered skirmishes that had defined our previous encounters. Marcus listened to the entire statement in silence, his expression unreadable, though when my father finished speaking and the restraints were finally removed from his wrists for the last time, I saw something in his posture ease, a tension I had not fully realized he was still carrying until it visibly lifted from his shoulders. "You're truly letting me go," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. "We are," my father said, "though I suspect this is not truly a goodbye, given the arrangements we've discussed." Marcus's gaze found mine across the room, and something passed between us in that moment, an understanding built not on the calm, careful conversations we had shared in the earliest days of his captivity, nor on the violence and fear that had followed, but on something far more complicated, forged in the space between two species who had spent far too long assuming the worst about each other. "No," he said, "I don't suppose it is." Before he departed, I requested a final moment alone with him, a request my father granted, with a small, knowing look that told me he understood exactly how significant these past several days had become for me, even if I had not yet fully admitted it to myself. "I owe you an apology," I said, once we were alone in the small transport bay, where a shuttle waited to carry him back toward the marker, and eventually, home. "For what?" he asked. "For laughing, that first day, when you told me not to wake a sleeping giant. I dismissed you. I dismissed your entire species, the same way everyone around me had been taught to dismiss you for years." Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying my face with the same careful attention he had shown from the very beginning. "You changed your mind," he said finally. "That's more than most people manage, in my experience, once they've built an entire worldview around believing themselves superior to something they've never actually taken the time to understand." "I nearly didn't change it in time," I said. "If Dorn's actions had gone even slightly differently, if you had responded to that provocation with even a fraction less restraint, this entire situation could have ended very differently for both our peoples." "Maybe," Marcus said, "but it didn't. And now we have a chance to build something better out of it, instead." I thought about everything that had happened since that first alarm woke me on the bridge of the Solmara, days that felt now like they belonged to an entirely different version of myself, one who had believed, without question, that strength and weakness could be measured simply by the size of a creature's ship, or the sophistication of its weapons, rather than by the quiet, patient discipline required to hold back an overwhelming power even when every instinct might have justified unleashing it fully. "What happens now?" I asked. "For you, I mean, once you return home." "I report what happened here," he said. "Honestly, the way I promised your father, my people will want to understand exactly what your Dominion is prepared to offer, in terms of actual diplomatic relations, rather than the scattered skirmishes we've grown used to along the border." "And you believe they'll listen?" "I believe they'll listen to me," he said. "Whether they choose to trust the offer itself is a different question entirely, but I intend to make the case as clearly as I can that the Kirinth Dominion, or at least its future ruler, has shown more wisdom in these past several days than most of my own commanders expected from any alien power we've encountered so far." I felt something warm settle in my chest at his words, though I said nothing, simply nodding as the shuttle's boarding ramp lowered behind him. "Vayana," he said, before stepping aboard, using my name the way he had since our very first proper conversation, without the formal titles my own people insisted upon. "Thank you for listening, eventually, even if it took longer than either of us would have liked." "Thank you," I replied, "for restraint, for choosing not to become the disaster my people feared, even when we gave you every reason to." He offered a small, tired smile, the first genuine smile I had seen from him since his capture, and then he was gone, the shuttle doors sealing behind him as he began the long journey back toward a homeworld I had never seen, carrying with him a message that would determine whether the fragile trust we had built together would grow into something lasting or collapse under the weight of decades of mutual suspicion between our species. I stood in that transport bay long after the shuttle had departed, watching through the observation window as it grew smaller and smaller against the vast, star-strewn darkness beyond our fleet, until it finally vanished entirely from view. I thought about the moment my crew first pulled his damaged vessel into our landing bay, certain we had captured nothing more than an easy trophy, a curiosity to present to my father as proof of our continued dominance over a species we had never bothered to truly understand. I thought about the calm, patient way he had answered every question I asked, even the ones meant to provoke or belittle him, and the quiet warning he had offered me on that very first day, a warning I had dismissed with the easy laughter of someone who believed she already understood everything worth knowing about the galaxy around her. "Don't wake a sleeping giant," he had told me. I understood now, in a way I could not have grasped before watching him move through that arena, before hearing him speak honestly about the fear his own people carried for exactly the kind of conflict we had nearly created, that the giant he spoke of had never truly been asleep at all. It had simply been waiting, patiently and carefully, for someone from a species that had underestimated it for far too long to finally take the time to listen. As I turned to leave the transport bay, already composing in my mind the first formal request I intended to submit to my father regarding the future diplomatic delegation to Earth, I found myself thinking not of the fear that had gripped this ship during those chaotic days, nor of the political complications that would surely follow from everything that had happened, but of a single, quiet truth that I suspected would shape the rest of my life, and perhaps the future of both our species, far more than anything else that had occurred aboard the Solmara. We had come looking for a trophy. We had found, instead, the beginning of an equation neither species had fully understood before, one built not on conquest or dominance, but on the far more difficult, far more valuable lesson that true strength often reveals itself not through the damage it causes, but through the restraint it chooses to show, even when every advantage might justify doing otherwise. I did not know, standing there in that empty transport bay, exactly how the diplomatic efforts ahead would unfold, or whether the fragile trust Marcus and I had built together would be enough to prevent further conflict between our peoples in the years to come. But for the first time since this entire crisis began, I found myself looking toward that uncertain future, not with fear, but with something close to hope, and a quiet, growing certainty that whatever came next, I would face it having finally learned the most important lesson my father's entire empire had somehow managed to overlook for generations. Some giants are worth waking gently and listening to carefully, rather than provoking carelessly and hoping for the best. I intended to spend the rest of my life making sure my people finally understood the difference.